Good afternoon. I am Dr. Joaquin Carbonara, Director of the Interdisciplinary Unit in Data Science and Analytics and Chair of the Data Science and Analytics MS. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Johnathan Manly. He's a long-standing member of the advisory board of our graduate programs and a good friend, and he is doing a fantastic job with data science in the revenue management area. He's currently director of the revenue management and live storage, and he manages pricing for a network of over 800 self-storage locations all over the world. And we are very much looking for hearing what he has to say. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Joaquin, for that great introduction. I want to talk about revenue management and data science analytics today. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of the revenue management science, how we apply it at Life Storage, and then get into a little bit more about specifically what tools we use and kind of what we use them for at Life Storage as well. I know many of the folks here, most maybe are students, so always very interested in realistic job previews. So I'll talk about that, and as well as kind of give you a grab bag of just things that I've picked up along the way, what I've observed in 20 years of doing business analytics, and some of the tips and some of the potholes maybe to avoid that I see young people coming out maybe do occasionally. So ways to differentiate yourself. And then if you've got some questions, then I'd love to take those at the end as well. All right, so my background, I've been doing analytics here in the Western New York area for 20 years. And if I do this presentation, you hear in a few more years, I'm still going to say 20 years. I was told, given the advice never to go higher than that number, but it's been going on for quite a while. I really got into it after I graduated from the University of Buffalo with an MBA in marketing, and that was really in that program where I really got my love and my interest in analytics and what would eventually become data science. Several years later, in 2017, I graduated from Georgia Tech. This was actually an online program in computer science, a master's degree as well. And along the way, I've worked really for 5 major companies. Started out at a small company, and I'll talk a little bit about the advantages of small companies later on in my talk, but it's a company called eMedco, which is now part of Brady Corporation over on Worley Drive, sort of a nice little monoline company, and then spent almost 15 years at HSBC and First Niagara banks, again, doing analytics and product management and pricing as well. Did a short stint over at Delaware North and left there about a year ago and went to Life Storage. Couldn't be happier at Storage, and I'm really excited to talk to you about that. Because this is a DSA audience, we need to talk about tools, and I've been doing for 20 years. SQL has been the underpinning and everything, every language I've worked with. Spent my early part of my career in SPSS, spent about 15 years doing SAS programming, but now, of course, it's much more Python and R. Python's really my favorite. We do a lot of work with Tableau, and of course, Excel is sort of the cost of admission to do any kind of analytics job. So who is Life Storage? Life Storage is what you call a REIT, a real estate investment trust. So it's a particular kind of corporation that makes all of its money off managing real estate. We own many of our stores, and then we also manage stores owned where the properties are owned by somebody else across the U.S. and in Canada as well now too. Our headquarters is in Buffalo. We've got about 2,000 people that we employ across the United States, and we've got a couple hundred right here in Buffalo and Amherst that work at our headquarters where we manage all of these stores. As far as data, we've got about 300,000 move-in transactions annually that we're running right now, so we're generating a lot of customer data, a lot of interesting stuff to look at. We actually founded in 1982, very early on in the storage area, went public in 1995. We're traded under the ticker symbol LIFE. And for those of you who have been in the Buffalo area, maybe grew up here, you may have remembered us as Uncle Bob's Self Storage. But around 2017, so prior to my time, we've rebranded as Life Storage nationwide. So just a map here of where we are. So it's not just sort of Uncle Bob's here in Buffalo. We do have 30 stores in the Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse area, but we've actually got heavier concentrations in areas like Chicago, downstate New York, New Jersey, the tri-state area. Lots in Florida, lots down in Texas as well, big storage areas there as well. So we're operating in all the time zones, and we've got a handful of stores up in the Toronto area, GTA of in Ontario as well. So as you said, 854 stores and counting right now. We've had over 450,000 customers and 62 million net rentable square feet. So that's a lot of real estate for us to manage and rent. So what is self-storage? Why would somebody use this? Essentially, self-storage, if you haven't had an occasion to rent storage with us or with somebody else, it's essentially you're renting a small enclosed space that's sort of yours for that time period. Could be as 9 square feet, like really almost a locker, 3 by 3 by 3, sort of a little cube, up to some fairly sizable 10 by 20, even 300, 400 square foot locations. Much of our product and much more of what's being built nowadays is actually climate controlled. So it's heated in the winter, it's air conditioned, humidity controlled in the summer, interior access kind of thing. But some of it also, you may be familiar, you can see it as you're driving by on the thruway, the sort of garage like the non-climate. It's just kind of a row of garages. You can drive right up and access it. So it's different products for different uses. The business is characterized by month-to-month leases. So typically it's not where your apartment might be an annual lease. This is a month-to-month lease where customers will come in typically for short durations, but oftentimes they'll stay around. That's one of the things that we study in RevMan is the customer duration. And it's all self-access, so customers will have an access code to get onto the property. They own their own lock, access it whenever they need to. So it really becomes an extension of their home or their garage if as they need to. Customers are responsible for insurance, but that's also an opportunity for us to do some cross-sell and some additional revenue generation. And then we sell merchandise as well. More specifically, the locks, but also moving supplies, packing supplies, things like that. These pictures that we've got here, I wanted to show you the two sort of extremes of storage spaces. So down at the bottom is what many people will think of as far as storage. This is a new facility. You can still see the shine on the floor there. If you were one of our customers, you'd have access to one of these units here. You'd have a rolling door. These would probably be a 10 by 10 unit behind that where you could access it. Above that is one of the stores. We own 3 or 4 of these, where it's really kind of very first class, almost a hotel-like storage facility. Marble floors, you can see we've got a multi-story sunny atrium with plants, balconies within it. So it's a really interesting facility for us, but it just kind of shows the range of everything from sort of a garage behind a fence to a first class facility. And then what we think about when we're managing our revenue, right, is our revenue comes from, once a customer moves in, is we think about the occupancy, right? Is you've got a facility, it's got a specific number of spaces. You want to know how much of that facility, how much of the square footage, how many of those units are currently occupied by a paying customer. The more customers you have occupied that are paying their bills, the more money you're going to have. The other question is the duration, right? This is short-term, month-to-month rental. Often people will need space only for a month or two. Perhaps you just need a transitional space while you're doing a renovation project or while you're moving. Sometimes people use this as small warehouse space for a small business, and they have ongoing needs that go on for a long, long time. So that's one of the things for us in RevMan that we can study and understand is the duration. And then, of course, the rate. And we're going to talk a lot about rates today. That's really the main decision a RevMan team will manufacture is those rate decisions for offering a product. So what is revenue management? Revenue management is a management science. It's actually developed in the 80s in response to airline deregulation, I believe is by American Airlines. I have a feeling probably many of the folks here on the call won't remember any of this happening, but at that time there's an upstart disruptor airline called People's Express that was coming in and taking a number of routes. It was some kind of business model that you see today with the JetBlue or Southwest when they came in, but it's brand new then. And American Airlines was having a lot of trouble competing with them. Of course, they didn't want to kind of give up their high-priced, top, best service kinds of prices, but they were losing a lot of flights to them. And so they developed these revenue management techniques we're going to talk about. We're very, very successful with them, and it's quickly spread across. It's just kind of part of the business with airlines, with car rentals. Some of the car rental companies had used this to great success as well, and hotels are using this as well, and of course, now self-storage. Really, the goal is to be able to sell that same product to different customers at different prices. So, this is different than many like hard goods, right? If you're selling your iPhone, right, Apple controls those prices. And so you almost never see a variation in the price of a brand new iPhone. But when you've got a revenue managed product, you can see a lot of variation of that over a number of different dimensions, which we'll dive into. And a lot of what we're doing from a corporate perspective is trying to understand what's the customer behavioral dynamics of their willingness to pay. We'll explain why that's more of an interest of how much the customer is willing to pay than, say, the cost, right? An iPhone costs a certain amount. Apple needs to be able to make that money back when they sell those phones. Revenue managed industries tend to have a little bit different cost structure as well. And then, of course, you need to have scalable and efficient systems to quickly make changes. When you're an enterprise business, you've got lots and lots of flights, lots and lots of different seats. We've got tens of thousands of prices at Life Storage that we manage, literally. So we need to have good systems to be able to quickly make changes to respond to different events. And boy, we've had some events to respond to lately, haven't we? So classical revenue management, right? So this is kind of where it was built around. One of the thoughts to consider here, or one of the tenets of it, is that the products are capacity limited and immediately perishable. Again, that's different from your iPhone in that if somebody doesn't want to pay $1,000 for an iPhone today, perhaps I'll hold on to it and I'll sell it tomorrow. Well, if you've got an airline, that airline is going to, your plane's taking off, you've only got one day and one flight where you can make money off that seat there. You can't decide, well, I'm going to hold on to that seat for another day to sell it, right? The whole plane goes together. So what it usually means is you've got high fixed costs, right? It costs a lot to buy the plane. It costs a lot to put the plane in the air, but the low variable costs. So you can pretty much sell each marginal seat for anything, and it still helps to improve your profitability position. And that's something that's unique to hotels, to airlines, to self-storage, right? That you don't get when you're selling dishwashers or iPhones or such. It also helps to have customers book ahead of time. We don't have this as well with self-storage, but you certainly do with the airlines, right? This allows the revenue management team to manage the pricing and the inventory as you get closer to the day of the event when that is going to expire. So you can sell things early on, right? And I'm sure we've all booked airlines. You've had the experience where you go on and wonder, well, is today the day I book? Is this really the best price I'm going to get? Maybe I'll get something better or worse later on, right? And the way the airlines do that and the way that the system was, science was developed, was around opening, closing, booking classes. So literally taking some seats on the airplane and saying, well, these are going to be my less expensive seats and some that will be more expensive seats. And each one of those will have different pricing, and you may offer them through different channels or at different time frames, right? So technically, the prices didn't change, but were kind of pre-allocated to the capacity and then deployed that way over time. And there's actually an interesting story. It's been making the rounds on the internet lately. I forget which airline it was. But you could find it where there's, of course, the airlines right now are one of the industries really impacted by what's going on today. And so most people aren't flying, and so there was a case recently where you could read about where I think there's only 3 people on an airplane and they're all sat next to each other in the very last row of the airplane, which seems like a crazy thing to do to one of your customers. But of course, these customers all took the lowest price possible, and that was allocated to a booking class that started in the back of the airplane in the least convenient, least appropriate, least desired seat. And so I think the airline did the right thing for the customer once they got off the ground. It's just interesting that it exposed the way their revenue management works. So let's think about how we might use this. Well, I'll take you through an example, and then Joaquin and I will try to do a interactive example and get you all involved, let you manage a little revenue yourself. So if you think about it, pretend you've got an airplane, it's got 300 seats on it. We've decided to put it in the air and make a flight. And you and your team, you've done customer research, and you have a good distribution that you feel good about of what the customer's willingness to pay is. So 30% of your customers are willing to pay $100 to fly in the airplane. You've got another 40% that'll pay up to $200 to fly in the airplane. Another 20% will pay $300, and there's 10% that maybe they're willing to pay $500. So this you'll often get is different customers have different assessments, different importances for the product, and they'll pay different prices for it. But the question is, what are you going to do about this? How are we going to price this particular flight? So let's try one thing. We'll say, well, you know what? We could take the weighted average of the willingness to price, right? That's a reasonable mathematical thing to try. That'd be $220. So maybe should the price be $220 per seat? Well, at $220 per seat, 300 seats, you've got $66,000 in gross potential revenue. So you hear this a lot actually in real estate, is that people talk about the gross potential. What's that pricing? How much money could you potentially make if everything went according your way? Well, if we went out there with $220 per seat, the problem here is that 70% of your customers out there in the world aren't willing to pay that much. So if you don't have a large enough audience, you're not going to sell out that flight. So here the math, if we say maybe there's 500 customers, prospects rather, that you might be able to turn into customers, if you're pricing at $220, you're actually only going to be able to sell out half of your flight, and you're only going to make 33 grand off of that. And the customers, every single customer who signed your plane right there would have paid a lot more than you charged them. They all think that they got a bargain with that. And it's not that we want unhappy customers, but if your job is pricing, then you need to be thinking about how do you really make sure you're getting the willingness to pay in your pockets. So let's apply some RevMan techniques to this. What we'll do is we'll create 4 different booking classes. We'll price some of these tickets at $100. Some are $200, some are $300, some are $500. They're all the same seats on the same airplane, right? They're all going to go from Buffalo to Chicago or wherever. They all leave at the same time, get there at the same time, but we're going to charge different prices. And you can see this if you go onto any airline site today. They'll have 3 or 4 booking classes that you can see right away. And there's extra stuff. Do they include the bag check? Do they let you redeem the ticket or reschedule it? That kind of thing. So there's some value added, but they're all basically the same product, right? So what you do as the revenue manager is you'd say, I'm going to sell as few of the $100 and $200 flights as possible. I'm going to sell as many of the $300 and $500 as possible, right? So the best case scenario in this case, again, thinking about maybe I've got a total prospect universe of 500 folks, is you can do the math here. We wouldn't need to sell any seats at 100. We can sell out that entire plane, get all 300 seats sold, except now we're making $85,000 gross potential on that. We've raised the average seat price to $283. So we've made 28% more revenue just by changing the pricing around, just from revenue management. And that's kind of the key there, is making sure you've got the pricing right, you've got the right customers at the right time at the right price. There's a lot of opportunity from a business perspective. Now, of course, in this case, 200 customers are sad and didn't get a ticket. They don't get to go on vacation, so perhaps it'd be an opportunity to have a co-branded bargain airline as well to sell those guys something. Now, as I was writing this, right, the world has changed rapidly. So I thought maybe we should talk about, what we're seeing out there today, right? Because there's lots of very, very low prices available for flights today. And so what's happening is that audience, right, the number of people who are available to fly or willing to fly right now has dropped suddenly, right? We're being encouraged not to fly. We're being encouraged not to leave our houses. And many people wouldn't want to be on an airplane anyhow right now with the health concerns. So in our example here, if we drop from, say, 500 down to 150 for total prospects, right, at best you're going to get 50% occupancy, and that's selling every single potential person who are out there. But the way that looks to people is that you're out there selling each one of those tickets, and there's still, right up until the last moment before the flight, there's still half a flight worth of $100 seats out there. So the appearance from sort of our best case scenario here to our worst case scenario here, in this scenario, we're seeing prices between $500 and $200 and flights booked out in advance. Here, right up until the last possible moment, you can get on that flight for $100. So that's effectively how that price drops, is that we're still trying to sell those lower priced booking classes in order to fill up that airplane, because it's still going to cost us the same amount to put the airplane in the air. This I thought was very interesting. Again, as I was writing this, new things kept on coming up. This is an advertisement I got in my personal email from Frontier. So Frontier Airlines is a very price sensitive, sort of an a la carte airline. You're not included a beverage. You pay extra for the blanket. You pay extra for bag check. This was about the lowest price I've ever seen for an airplane. It's any domestic flight for a penny, which I almost couldn't believe it. You have to spend $60 to get a club membership, which lasts for a year, but then you can use that over and over again for flights, and you can apply it to, I think, 6 people in your family. So if anyone is looking for domestic travel, there may be a great bargain right here. But this is such an extreme example. Again, you've got lots of flights that are just almost completely empty, lots of flights open. And so I suppose Frontier is uniquely placed for this. They can get a little revenue through club memberships. They can get a little revenue through bag check fees and maybe by selling beverages, and as well as the positive PR for it. But really extreme revenue management example. I don't think any of us would have expected to see even 30 or 60 days ago. All right, so we're going to dive into really self-storage here, give you a little more example, a little taste of how we apply these kinds of techniques, how we do it at Life Storage. We don't use the booking classes, but also to talk about really how we apply DSA at Life Storage. So keep in mind here, these are some of the important concepts. One is that low or no marginal cost to sell in storage in particular. Somebody pays for the building to be built. We've got a little bit of maintenance costs. So we've got people on site who are taking care of the facility. But really the difference between whether Joaquin moves into one of my spaces or it doesn't, my cost base really stays largely the same. So we're ready to sell it at any time. There's also a concept here, because we're talking about different prices to different people for the same product, about information asymmetry, right? And that means that I know what people are willing to pay. I've got information about what different folks are paying, but that's not public information, right? It's the same kind of thing as when you're on your airplane. You don't know what the person next to you paid for their ticket. And if everybody knew what they were doing, what everybody else was paying, then things would probably be less comfortable for the airline, frankly. And then how do you do this? You do this through segmentation. It's very important to have effective segmentation. So if we're going to have different prices, we need to be able to offer those to different people through different means. So one of the keys you do that is around location. So for us, it's a store. We'll put a store in a particular area, and only people who are near to that store will consider that store. So I've had widely different prices depending on across different stores. Similarly, flights are not all in the same consideration set if you're thinking about an airplane. So a Sunday night flight is perhaps as attractive as Friday morning or Saturday morning flight as well, even though they're all getting you from the same place to the next place. There's convenience and comfort, right? In the airlines, you've got those middle rows where you've got an extra 3 inches of legroom. And so while that's really the same chair, it's a little bit more convenience or comfort for the user, and those will attract better price. In storage, we're doing some of that kind of thing as well. Not with legroom, but with convenience to get to your particular space. You can do customer segmentation. So if you've got, a military discount, sometimes the student discounts, right? Commercial, sales teams, club members, that kind of thing. So you're differentiating customers based on some attribute that they can volunteer and potentially sell to them in a different way. You can sometimes get, in many industries, different prices depending on whether you're self-service online, if you might call into the call center and ask for a quote, versus if you just walk into the store without doing the research. So it's another way that many industries will do that, as well as I think I mentioned days and dates. So 3 ways we think about doing pricing here, and really what we do at Life Storage, we try to integrate all these concepts. One is cost plus, right? And so you'll see that many commodity industries, I buy something for X and I sell it for X plus 7% or plus 10%. You just add a margin to that, right? But that's really ignoring what a customer might pay or what your competition might be charging, right? You're just really only looking internally at your cost, very finance-driven kind of thought. You've got competition-based, right? You just say, I need to beat the competition, but perhaps you're not actually asking your customers what they're willing to pay, and you might be missing out on something, and you may or may not be tying up to cover your costs. Again, in self-storage and in many revenue management areas, the cost is less of a consideration, but in many industries you have that. And then there's value-based, where you're going to ask, you try to understand how important is this to the customer. I remember buying some software. In fact, I believe SaaS software used to sell in this means is they would try to understand how much value you're going to derive, how much money you're going to make using their statistical software in the industry, and charge you based on that. Even though the marginal cost to deliver software, right, they're giving you a CD, is almost nothing. They've got some problems now that you can get much of that functionality through open source software, right? But what we do at Life Storage is we really try to do integrated pricing. We try to understand that customer. We spend a lot of time thinking about the competition. And of course, the marginal cost is pretty low for us. So we move on from there. If you want to think about your revenue, one of the things you can think about is, or rather the one thing you really know the best is the price that you set, right? So this chart right here shows how much money do you make given the sale of a product? So assuming that you sold something, how much money do you make? So it's a fairly linear line, right? The more money you charge, the more money you're going to make. This chart runs from about $30 to about $90. This is kind of from a self-storage example, so we'll make some money off the rent, but you've also got some historical estimates of cross-sale. Yeah, typically I sell insurance this much. Typically I'll sell a lock in a box this often, so you can estimate how much revenue you've got. But it doesn't incorporate what happens if you don't actually sell anything at all, right? So how about this? If everybody take a look at this chart here and think about if you just understand between $30 and $90, this is all the information here, what would you actually charge? What would be the price? At $30 price, you might make about $42, and at $90 price, we're looking at about $120. So this is interesting. So we've got a pretty good sort of mass. The most median answer here is $55, right about in the middle. We've got a little bit of a skew towards 65. A few folks want 90, a few folks want 30 or 45. So we've got kind of a wide range, but a little bit skewed towards the middle to the higher end of things. Let's kind of keep that in mind as we move on. All right, so this right here is this consumer price response function. There's lots of different distributions that you can use for different situations and different products. This is the one that we tend to use at Life Storage as self-service. Self-storage, there's this S-shaped consumer response function. And essentially what that means is that we know theoretically at least that the less you charge for a product, right, the more you're going to sell, but it's S-shaped because you can saturate the market, right? I can take self-storage. As I drop the price from 75 down to 60, I'll sell more. Drop it down to 50, I'm going to sell more. But as I go kind of beyond that, I still sell a little bit more and a little bit more. But at some point, you have saturated the local area. There's just not that many people that have stuff they need to store at a particular time. And you have the same thing whether you're selling iPhones or hamburgers or whatever it is. Same thing is you can continue to raise the price. The more you move to the right side of the curve, you're going to decline. You're going to have less and less product that you're going to sell. But there's always somebody out there that really has either they're not aware of what a fair price is for that product, or they've really got a high valuation of the value of the product. And so it'll approach zero. Maybe it'll actually get to zero, but it declines. And there's some, you can really stretch those prices out there. And you usually get somebody will pay for it at some time as well. This is hard, right? This is it's kind of the grail that every revenue management professional is searching for and trying to understand for their industry and for that situation, right? And then just when you sort of understand what the situation is, then along comes 9-10 million unemployment, and perhaps that changes the distribution and their perception of prices. We use our predictive analytics. We do a lot of work in Python using our open source predictive analytics, gathering all the historical data we can muster, between competition, time of year, seasonality, product pricing, promotions, marketing, and such to really understand how a customer will respond at a different price. And you never really know. The first chart I showed you, you really know what's going to happen because you know what the price is. This is always an estimate, and it's always going to be based on a number of assumptions that you've got. Think about this. Think about this consumer price response function. If you're really just looking at the consumer price response, where would you put that price? Would you do something different maybe? If you picked $30 before, would you still pick 30? For the folks who picked 90, if you knew this was really where's the consumer response, what would you pick? So that's interesting. So we've got a different distribution now, right? Very focused. Before, the most common price was 55. We still have a lot of folks voting for 55, but we've shifted right off of 90, really, focused very much on 45, which wasn't a terribly popular price last time. This still isn't quite what we do here at Life Storage. What we'd like to do is we integrate both pieces of information, right? We know what the blue line here, we know how much money we'll make if we have a sale. So just think about your conditional probabilities. We've also got something that tells us how much we'll sell depending on those different prices. But really what we're after not so much is total occupancy or the maximum rate, but we're here to manage the revenue, the total amount of revenue that comes through. So what we can do is multiply these two charts together, and we end up with is an expected value function that we can actually optimize. Now what you're seeing here is those trade-offs, right? It's the trade-offs between lots of volume, but maybe at a lower price, versus I've got a great price and I've got a lot of revenue when somebody does move in, but I'm not selling very much of it. So the revenue starts to fall back off again. So we can use this kind of thing as a framework for what if simulations. You can try different kinds of assumptions based on what I think competition is going to do or what's going to happen with seasonal demand, and start to understand sort of where would we set those prices. Where would you set the price based on this expected value? So now we've really clustered around. We've got a lot of consensus here among our revenue management team that $55 is the right price. That's I would absolutely agree with that. For most circumstances, that's going to give us the highest expected value. That's going to bring in the most revenue and continue to pay for revenue management analysts and interns and everything like that. The exception of that might be there might be reasons you might have a client that's looking to, maybe we're doing something special with cross-sell, and so we're more interested in having every possible person move in, build that word of mouth kind of thing. So you might sub-optimize your revenue for other goals in the short term. As a facility sells out, maybe I don't have enough product. We've got great occupancy. We don't have enough to actually reach that top of the curve. So there might actually be cases where you move down it. But absolutely agree here. You're all revenue managers now. $55 is exactly where I would set the price in this example. All right, so I'll tell you a little bit about kind of level storage, how we use our tools. On my team, we've got an integrated data science team. So the way we're organized is a little bit unique in that the data science team is the revenue management team. We're essentially building our own tools to help set those prices. So it's I've been on other teams where you've got a separate analytics group that's might be helping to influence or advise, but here we're actually building our own tools, putting them into action every day. We use SQL Server databases. We've got in-house databases, again, 850 stores, several years, so a lot of great data for that, and it's important to have that scale and that amount of data behind it. We use a lot of Tableau. We've got a couple of folks on my team that are really, really good at Tableau, do some very cool things with data visualization, and that is incredibly helpful for us to be able to read lots of information, interpret it, understand it, and make those decisions very quickly when you're dealing with, again, 800 different stores and 40,000 different prices. You need to be able to understand that very quickly. Developing very quickly Python, R, and SQL for all our data wrangling to develop our predictive analytics. And then we're also doing a lot of A/B testing. We collaborate with our marketing team for A/B testing on the website for different customer experiences, as well as doing different pricing tests to try different combinations of pricing and promotion or different strategies in different areas. And all that comes together within self-storage, really, because we've got the scale for that at Life Storage. So if self-storage is kind of also characterized by having low transaction volume, it's not like Amazon, right, where we've got hundreds of thousands of transactions happening every week, or a Wegmans where you've got lots and lots of data points. Mostly, in the tens or hundreds, right, within the store. But when you've got hundreds of stores, you can put these together and understand the customer behavior. For data visualization, again, we'll use Tableau, the kinds of things we'll use it for. Store performance, we do a lot of geographic mapping, understand so we can pick out areas of performance or pricing, or, today we're doing COVID impacts to understand, where our stores are, where greater impacts or lesser leading impacts from COVID right now. We do a lot of tracking of our competitors and understanding how they're pricing against us in each individual area, as well as demographics, cross-sell rates. And then we also deliver some products using Tableau out to our clients as well, too, the folks that we're managing stores for. Predictive analytics, most of it's in Python now. We're doing some work in R as well. We'll do a lot of classic regressions because they're much easier to interpret and to explain, but we do a lot with random forests, and we've got some of our more sophisticated stuff running in Keras neural nets today. And around that, that's customer behavior. Some of the curves that we showed before there, the customer purchase propensity, customer attrition, how soon is somebody going to leave, how long will they stay, if we're taking those reservations ahead of time, what's the quality of the reservations, and do we need to do anything to influence them to help the customers make sure that they choose Life Storage for the storage purpose as well. A lot of exciting stuff here. We're doing a lot of R&D, and I'm really excited about where we're going here. And then I mentioned the A/B testing is the online experience where you may log on to Life Storage's website and you may see something different than somebody else would. Over time, we're testing that and understand really what is the most effective way to help customers understand what the storage options are. We'll test pricing and promotion regimes in ways that you can't do with an individual store, because I can put together test panels of several stores in several cities and observe the statistical behavior across of those, and that's really where we get our size and scale. All right, so last piece here. It's kind of a grab bag of observations and thoughts, what I've seen over my years in analytics, and some advice on how to grow your career in data and analytics. So, what's changed? I've been doing this for, again, 20 years or so. One of the things that's changed, and that it's really an exciting time for everybody who's building their career in DSA, is that the tools and training are everywhere and very affordable, right? You guys, you're in an excellent program. The SUNY programs are just an amazing bargain. You've got a passionate group of teachers here. And then out there on the internet, you can go and supplement your knowledge, and you should be supplementing your knowledge as well. Hasn't always been the case. When I was starting in my career, it was thousands of dollars to even just get a piece of software to get access to it, to practice. And now, of course, you can get access to the best software that's out there that everybody is using. The bad news is that you've got to because you're competing with folks for jobs as well, and that everybody's got access to this. So it's been very democratized. So it really kind of gets down to your efforts and your talents as well. What else has changed here? Nowadays, you'll hear your business leaders ask, right? They're very without prompting. They'll often ask, well, what does the data say? What can you tell me about it? What do the numbers say on this? That wasn't always the case. I remember earlier in my career, we were building some of the analytics teams like at HSBC, where we really had to kind of sell, the idea of using data, using numbers to help make your business decisions as opposed to choices. But it really is much more, it's an exciting time to be in DSA right now because it's very much at the forefront of business needs. This is important here. When you're doing work out in industry, often somebody will work very hard, make an analysis, hand it in, do their presentation, and then immediately get piles of questions back. Well, now I need to know A and B, and can you split it this way? Can you split it that way, right? Analysis often sparks new work. It can sometimes feel a little demoralizing because you feel like you've worked very hard, you solved exactly what your boss asked for, and now he or she is just asking for even more information. But don't take it as that. It's a sign of an engaged audience. If somebody's not asking questions, maybe they didn't understand it. Analytics tends to be a self-perpetuating area. Once they understand more, they want to know more information. So you'll often see that. They'll answer a question and get two back for your trouble. When you're doing your analysis, you're going to want to talk about your methodology, then maybe how you're covering it in your academic things. You got to get to the point very quickly in business, though. Probably start with the point and then explain how you understood it later. It's kind of a little bit inside out from the academic approach. And really the whole point is you got to find the story. Understand what do these numbers mean in your analysis. If you can find that, help relate it to the problem and really think about what does this mean and kind of help your other folks to understand to read the numbers who will not be as good at it as you are, you're going to be awesome in your career. It's not easy, but that's how you can differentiate yourself. How to stand apart in interviews. Do something outside of your classwork. I know you're going to get all kinds of awesome stuff here in your program, but make sure that you're touching Tableau, you're touching R, you're touching Python, you do some work in SQL, whatever you want to work in. There's going to be these, in a couple of years there'll be other tools, but whatever those are, make sure you're actually touching it, you're working on most of these things. You can get open source for free, you can get student packages, you can get trial packages. Don't worry that you don't know it all, right? But make sure you've touched it, you've done something that you care. Go analyze something you care about and make something with it. And part of it, that make something with it is really important because when you go to try to explain to somebody or try to make a product with the analytics, which is what you're going to need to do to be successful in business, right? All of a sudden you find out like, oh gosh, maybe I don't really understand everything. It helps you make a better product. And it gives you something that you can show off, right? So there's lots and lots of people who are studying COVID data right now. It doesn't have to be COVID data. It can be something that's personally interesting to you or it's a good data set. But do some work. Write up a blog post about hockey if that's what you're into. Build a web app around it and put that out there. Do a little short video presentation because that's going to be great practice for what you need to do out in the industry world. And then finally here, never send a LinkedIn request without a personal note. I get them all day long from people who are trying to sell me stuff and just says, hey, I'd like to add me to your LinkedIn network, right? If you say something, say why you know me or why you know the person you're trying to attack, you're trying to talk to, why you're trying to link with them, and make it personal and stand out in that way because otherwise it's very easy to get ignored. When you're doing your interviews, practice interviewing before the interview. Download the list of top 20 interview questions because you want to be practiced before you actually get out there. It's sometimes painfully obvious when I'm interviewing folks that just haven't had a lot of experience with the interview. It's not a normal conversation, and you want to be kind of good at it on the day of the show. And then always send a thank you after the interview. It sounds kind of silly, maybe showing my age with it, but it used to really be a very standard kind of thing to do to send a handwritten note. You can just send the email, just drop a quick note, maybe link to that blog post or that web app that you did just to follow up. But it shows your interviewer that you care and that you want the job and you still remember the conversation afterwards. Print out your work to proofread it. Typos are visible on screen. Practice your presentations, but not to memorize it. I practiced this presentation to make sure that it flowed as well as I could and that I had the words that I want to say on it, but I'm totally improvising at the moment. One of the things you can Google this rubber duck debugging, saying things out loud, whether you're trying to understand what's wrong with your code or what's wrong with your presentation. As soon as you say it out loud, you can often hear mistakes or just like you're missing a logical leap. You're not quite telling the story right. And again, you want to polish that stuff out before you get out in front of people. And then I think finally here, your first DSA job, I think I mentioned started off here that I started at a small company. And it was excellent for me. It was really the best thing I could have done. Small companies can give you a lot of room to grow. They don't have a lot of resources. They don't have a lot of hierarchies either. So there's not a lot of other teams to say, no, stay in your box, stay in your lane. So if you're a self-starter, you can get out there and you can learn a lot. But larger companies will have that formal framework. So if you're somebody who likes something that's more structured, you may not get that at a smaller company, but you can get that at a larger company where you'll know what the next step is and the next step and the next step. Every company's trying to provide everything, but as you're getting out there looking for your next job, think about kind of what kind of environment you like to work in and whether that company is going to offer that. We do offer opportunities at Life Storage. We do host paid internships in RevMan and several other departments. We do in-house development on our website. We build our own operating system for the stores. We build our own call center applications, and all of revenue management algorithms and applications are built in-house as well. I've had excellent experience working with folks from this program before, and so I'd encourage you to put Life Storage on your radar, and hopefully a couple of weeks as we're all returning to the office and kind of returning to whatever new normal is here. We've got HQ in Williamsville that always has opportunities for talent. To learn more, here's two books maybe you wouldn't have thought of. One is Robert Phillips, if you're interested in the pricing science that I was talking about. This is an excellent book. I've got to keep it next to my desk all the time. It's sort of a textbook. It's a bit dry, but it covers really everything you could think of. It's very well explained, and it's been very influential in what we've been building in Life Storage. At the other end of the spectrum is The Adventures of Johnny Bunko by Dan Pink. It's a general career guide. I will tell you, it's a comic book. I've had people come back and say, John, you've prescribed a comic book for me. Yeah, so it's a quick read, it's a fun read, but it still gives you a couple things to think about that will probably stick in your head for a while as you're out and building your career. So with that, I've talked a lot at you, but really appreciate staying with me today and then doing some pricing, some self-storage pricing. So I'll pause there, hand things back to Joaquin, and see if there's any questions or anything else I can cover for you.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was so great. This is Heather, by the way.
Hi, Heather. Thank you.
One of the things I was wondering is you showed a lot of information about, for example, how much somebody would be willing to pay. And obviously, since your company's been around for a while, you can kind of use the data that you already have. But I'm just wondering, if you're a new startup or something like that, how do people get that kind of information? Of course, they could analyze other companies that are selling similar products, but I'm just wondering how maybe Life Storage went about doing that, or how other people do it.
Sure. Well, yeah, no, you're absolutely right that with Life Storage, when I came over there, the company had already been doing a fantastic job of keeping lots and lots of data around, right? So I could essentially analyze that history. Now, history changes, a lot of changes, so you always have to think about the future and how can I apply this, does this still generalize to the future? If you're starting brand new from the beginning, then kind of the couple thoughts. One is you can do some primary research, some surveys and conjoint analyses and such. Now, I've always feel it's much, much better when you can observe customers in the natural environment. But when you can't do that, you can often create some market research tools that will help to simulate those kinds of trade-offs and those choices. That'll give you some guidance as well. And then to make sure as well that when you're starting off your testing, when you are actually out there pricing, and you may just need to take a guess, right, and put it out somewhere, but build in that test design so you're generating the data. I've done that a couple times over the past couple of years here, certainly over the last year, as we've done some new, maybe if we didn't know exactly how the customers were going to respond, we're testing things, we're setting them up in different ways, thinking about how we're going to analyze this in a month or 2 months or 6 months so that we can generate the data and move quickly.
Hi, Jonathan. This is Melissa. I have a question about, being that you've been with a global company with HSBC and now a national company with Life Storage, how is it from a revenue management standpoint you do pricing models that are regionally based? I don't know this empirically, but I believe Buffalo is a particular market, and I'm just wondering if you can speak to how it is you adjust by market.
Certainly, as a lifelong Buffalo resident, I agree with you. Buffalo's different and all in a good way. But yeah, so we're working in lots of different areas, and with life storage in particular, you do need to kind of consider that folks not only are behaving differently, but we've got, say, in Miami. If you even just go onto Google and Google self-storage, you'll see that there's literally self-storage on every corner in some of these areas. Incredibly dense competition, right? One of the things we'll try to do to move away from the regional or understand the regional is to look at, well, what are those drivers, right? Is it economic? Is it about the density of the area? Is it about the drive time? Is it about the thickness of the competition? Is it about the cost? So you look for those underlying threads that can tie together. Why is Buffalo and Cleveland similar, more similar than Houston or Miami in that? So a lot of what we'll try to do is to understand what are those common drivers that can help understand why a region behaves differently than another.
So I'm coming to my question with an assumption that you're speaking to a number of students here, but with an assumption that the actual salaries are going to be lower here. So I guess I'm asking specifically, are there databases that you go to that help inform the nexus of those threads that you're talking about pulling? Sure.
Yeah. So we're trying to, without giving away too many of our secrets, we try to be there's a lot of clever things, right? A lot of clever things you can do with public information out there. Certainly, there's a lot of demographic information that's collected by the government, with the census, and then there's the blanking on the name right now. It's updated every couple of years. That so you've got some information around what salaries are. But one of the areas, like for us in real estate, a more comparable thing is, well, salaries are interesting, but how much does your apartment cost? Because that's really going to tie. How much does a house cost? How much does your apartment cost? How easy is it to get around, right? Because that tells us people how far they'll travel for a bargain, right? You happen to be under the impression folks in Buffalo will travel for a bargain in ways that you don't see in some other cities, right? So that changes kind of the way we do things. But so there's a lot of clever information you can get through, there's APIs that are already developed for R and for Python. You can also build a lot of information by inferring things off of things like the Google API or your own customers.
So I guess just to sum it up, it's safe to say it's as much of an art in many ways as it is a science.
Yeah. Oh, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? But yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of art and creativity, and because what we're trying to build is something that's new, will differentiate our company, keep us here for years to come. So we need to think about it differently. And as I said, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you'd have to go and buy some data from an Axiom or something like that, and that may still be a good idea. But there's a tremendous amount of information you can infer from social networks and from lots of different sources today, and really try to find out what's interesting for you and applicable to your business, and then think of a clever way of how to use it.
Thank you.
So Zahir, are you still out there? Do you still have a question?
Yes, John. So thank you. So my question is, if you have to open a store or a franchise in a city or a state, what do you take under consideration that there is a need for a store, and that's like, what do you look at? What data do you look at? And the second question would be is, if you don't have any historicals, like how do you project or how do you forecast sales for the next 3 months or quarter or 6 months or a year?
In practice, life storage, we usually don't start building our own stores. We typically acquire stores. There's actually a tremendous amount. There's 4 or 5 of our companies other REITs that manage large portfolios. There's a tremendous amount, about 80-85% of self-storage is managed by small regionals, mom and pops, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of facilities out there that, at some point somebody will want to sort of cash out. They don't want to operate anymore, and then those are available for sale. So we typically tend to buy mature properties and manage those as well. But we do get involved in that. A lot of what you look at, you're looking for population density. Wherever you've got people, there's a need for storage. It's not a lifestyle, it's a life event, right? Where if you're moving, for instance, then you need stuff. So if you look for an active economy, you look for personal density, that kind of thing. You look for, as long as there's things going on, people have need for storage. Forecasting, there's a phrase that's attributed to Yogi Berra. I think that it's hard to make forecasts about anything, particularly in the future. We have to do that, often anyhow, is to make forecasts. You'll have to do that at any business that you go to. A lot of, my experience on that has been that often what you need when you're making your financial forecast is explainability is paramount. So you can build something that's very slick. I've done that before, regression-based, maybe neural nets today that might be very accurate, but it'll take a long, long time if you can't explain your assumptions on everything that's happening. So I tend to build models that you can explain, understand the drivers, how they behavioralize in any forecast. Of course, there's a degree of imprecision, right? Risk in the future. I certainly didn't forecast what's happening in the environment today. That was not part of our plans for this year, but we're still working towards it. So you want to be able to understand, play with those assumptions in a way that you can understand what's your sensitivity. So how sensitive is your business forecast to new sales or to your pricing or the success of your new RevMan formula. Typically, when you're in a forecasting kind of event practice, if you're making a financial forecast, you're going to need to be able to speak to those kinds of questions as much as having the total accuracy.
Thanks. Is there a certain percentage for return of investment you guys look at on an annual basis, or is it on demand and supply?
Well, from a revenue management perspective, everything is on supply and demand. My own team, what we'll focus on, the properties are essentially already given. Somebody's already either bought them or built them or managed them, and I'm always trying to, my team is trying to optimize that, given that property over time. The capital allocation stuff other folks will take care of.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do our backend systems feed variable pricing to our website? And so all of our systems are integrated. So when we build, when I push our price out, it'll go to our call center, out to the stores, the distributed operating system, and to our website all at the same time.
So Wendy had to leave, but she also asked a question in the chat. She said, can you speak a bit about the data wrangling with historic revenue data? For example, do you adjust the data for inflation and or factoring living differences in many locations serviced?
Yeah, so I haven't in practice done a lot with adjusting for inflation. It's I think we haven't had a lot, or typically I don't go back too far in our analysis because customer behavior and the industry has changed so much. If you go back over several years, so over a 2 or 3 year time frame, usually you can ignore that level. But the way I normalize that kind of thing, because we have seen large price differences, over time in some cities. Houston is sort of the poster child for dramatic amount of supply that's really kind of changed asking rates over time. So I'll normalize our pricing with competitive indexes that were active at that time. So which tends to be a much more important mover of sales propensity than inflation for us. So Jeremy, what do you got?
Sure. John, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. You spoke with such conviction, a conviction, in fact, that I really hope one day I find in my career, because it seems you believe that, and I truly think you are, doing important work. Now, I just signed off from HSBC for the day, and I can also confirm with you that they are analytics driven, that they care about the numbers, that is what is driving decisions for them, besides intuition.
Good.
And my question for you is, as this movement for analytics and data, as it grows, I'm sure you've prospected into the future a little bit. I'll turn this question more personally. I can't see myself, and I don't know if it's because an ego is too big or something, but it doesn't appeal to me to think about analytics as something where I'm just typing buttons and trying to create numbers on my screen. That makes me want to pull my hair out, John. And at the end of the day, that's no fun.
Right.
So can you see analytics engaging the public too, more so than the private sector, going into actual public service and being available for people?
Yeah, so I guess, one thing I share from my own here, when I entered, and this was, 100 years ago, but when I entered UB for my MBA. I had no intention of being an analytics person. I probably would have said something exactly like you just said. And it was actually during that program when I realized, really kind of went through my first regression analysis and said, oh, hey, this is cool. Like you can do something with this. And it just kind of led me down that path, and one thing led to the other. And thank you for your observation. I mean, I never would have thought, 20 years, I never thought, boy, I really got to get into self-storage. That's. But I'm really glad that I have that. The opportunity came along. It's having a lot of fun, and I really get a lot of satisfaction working with a great team, which I do, and working for one of the hometown companies to help build that national presence. So it's a lot of fun. But do you actually have to be a Python coder, to do analytics? No, I mean, people need to be good at a lot of different stuff for business to succeed. And I know in my own life, I'll work professionally with folks who are good at other pieces, right? And I know when to get out of the way and let them do something for themselves. But even if you don't want to poke at it and work at it, well, maybe you haven't found the right tool, maybe you haven't found the right subject area, or maybe it's just a matter of, develop your critical thinking, right? Understand how to use analytics people and how to facilitate that conversation between the analytics and more creative areas and that kinds of things. Because folks who can bridge that gap are critically important as well too, to whatever your mission is, whether it's banking or as you said, kind of public service, nonprofit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Tom Bidney, by the way. Hey, John. Thanks for the presentation.
Hey, Tom. Thank you.
This is sort of a convoluted question, so I'm sorry. But I got into this program because I found it fascinating, sort of the economic or the financial background of analytics and like financial analytics and that sort of stuff. The thing is my bachelor's is in electrical engineering, so I'm sort of having a hard time making that transition and figuring out where I need to go. So I guess I've asked a few people in this position, do you have a course or a piece of literature or something outside of the pricing and revenue optimization that has sort of molded you into having a good understanding? I saw your background was originally marketing, so you know more about business than I do, but I guess I'm looking if there's some sort of course or something that could help me along the way.
I'd say, I think engineering would actually be an excellent foray into analytics. And again, part of it is having that logical, that critical thinking, sort of the systems thinking and, the precision that you're taught in an engineering program. So there's a lot of great sort of underpinnings for career in analytics. I'm not sure. I'll have to give that some thought and maybe send a note out if there's something that really lit up. For me, it was a matter of kind of, I found the one piece in my stats program and in my MBA program, and then that just led to a course where I thought, okay, well, I'll try this and I'll learn a little bit more and I'll learn a little bit more. And it's been 20 years of learning a little bit more maybe. And I think that's really the key. A lot of professional areas, but in engineering or in analytics where the world keeps on changing, right? It started off where SPSS was the main tool and SAS was kind of the pinnacle if you're a SAS programmer. And, that's probably just not the case. Apologies to any SAS users out there, anymore. And then, in 10 years from now, it may not be Python again, although I don't know if I want to live in that world. But, it's about learning and how to apply your skills to the next thing.
All right. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
I think that we've arrived to the end of the presentation. And thank you for a fantastic start to our webinar series. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you on our next presentation. And have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks. Nice seeing you.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you very much.